Museum of History Studios. You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg, and today we are talking about Shippensburg, the town of Shippensburg in the Pennsylvania or the Gettysburg Campaign. And with me is John Miller. He's the executive director of the Shippensburg Historical Society. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We tried to do this before, but we had a scheduling mix-up, and you showed up, and no one was here. And so for that, I publicly apologize to you. It just, it happens. It's one of those things.
Well, I'm glad to come down and join you this time.
Yeah. So Shippensburg. So I don't really know much about Shippensburg in regards to the campaign. I know that Johnson's division went through there, and we were talking some other troops went through there earlier at some point. But what else went on there? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, Shippensburg's getting ready to celebrate its 300th anniversary, being founded in 1730. And there's just a lot of history from the French and Indian War, Revolutionary War, and then you get into the American Civil War. And it's a little bit of history for everyone. So if you're interested in railroads through the Civil War, well, we have the Cumberland Valley Railroad that went through there. And if you're interested in following the troops to the gateway of Harrisburg, well, Shippensburg, just like Chambersburg and some of the other communities, pretty much were impacted by troop movements as well as other predominant figures of history. We were talking about Sturgis. He was born and raised in Shippensburg before he went to West Point.
So Sturgis, for those we were talking before the show, Sturgis, the colonel of the 7th Cavalry, he was actually the commander when the Battle of Little Bighorn happened, but he wasn't the field commander. Custer was, right? Is that how that worked out?
Correct.
Yeah. And so I didn't know that Sturgis was from Shippensburg.
And they're very proud of the fact that his, kid or childhood home sits right there near the square. And
yeah.
There's a small cafe, operating out of it. So if you want to go and look at the parlor and grab a quick bite to eat, well, you can do that. And there's interpretive panels. I think there's one in front of the actual house that tells you a little bit about Sturgis and what his military career was like.
So Shippensburg, Shippen, is that the Shippens of Revolutionary Era fame, or?
So Shippensburg gets its name from Edward Shippen III.
Okay.
And he was pretty much a very prominent physician, merchant out of the Philadelphia area. And he ends up getting quite a good chunk of land that he's going to eventually, is going to go ahead and sell to settlers coming in if they're willing to make a living in the wilderness, which at that time is a little unstable with the Native American populations. And with Edward Shippen, he always wanted the area to be called Shippensburg. That's pretty much what the land grant is, but the actual town itself wasn't put together or founded until about 1763, pretty much right at the close of the French and Indian War.
Okay.
And Pontiac's Rebellion.
So during the Civil War, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, prior to the Gettysburg Campaign, did it play much of a role in anything, or?
Well, Shippensburg, just like all the other communities, obviously once the Civil War pretty much kicks off, you're going to have troops enlisting into federal service. One of the more popular organizations would be Company D, of what would become the 130th Pennsylvania. They mustered in August of 1862. No sooner they arrive in Washington to basically, can't really call it basic training, but to go through some type of training. That is when the Confederate Army decided to go ahead and invade the North for the first time, and their baptism of fire basically took place not even a month's time of enlistment at a place called Bloody Lane on the Antietam battlefield.
And how did they do?
They did fairly well.
Yeah.
Fairly well. But they were only in there for a couple of months before, just like many other regiments in Pennsylvania, like the 126 that mustered out of service, just in time for the Confederate invasion to come in. So many of those
63
of 63, yeah. So many of those men would go ahead and enlist in other regiments, or pretty much they had enough of the war itself and pretty much said, I did my time, let's go.
Yeah, I don't blame them. So during the Gettysburg Campaign, get into that a little bit. What did it see?
So when Brigadier General Albert Jenkins's cavalry brigade was leading the advance of the Confederate Army, When he fords the Potomac River at Williamsport on June 15th, he makes it all the way to Chambersburg, and he'll go ahead and set his headquarters up there for a couple days. So because of that, the Department of Susquehanna, which is a pretty relatively brand new organization, they're going to go ahead and dispatch some cavalry units to go ahead and keep an eye out. And at the same time, Lincoln's Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, basically asked the New York governor for the mobilization of the New York State National Guard. So the 8th and the 71st will be the first ones to arrive in Harrisburg, and they're going to be brigaded with Brigadier General Joseph Knipe, and they're going to go ahead and go from Harrisburg directly to Shippensburg by rail, and their job basically is to stall the advance of the Confederate Army that's advancing into Pennsylvania. What's really cool about these guys, the 8th New York was actually wearing their gray fatigue uniforms. And one of the things with the New York National Guard that I saw a lot of accounts with is how do you distinguish them from Confederate soldiers?
Yeah.
And that's going to be an issue with them as they go on. Some of them actually put white crosses and sew them on the breast of their jackets to kind of like distinguish them. But
Right.
so they arrive at midnight going into June 21st and the 22nd, and they'll go down Scotland, Pennsylvania, which is right next to Shippensburg, start repairing the rail lines there that were destroyed by Jenkins's cavalry. And then the 8th was ordered to go ahead and go into Chambersburg, and that's where pretty much the whole story of the New York National Guard kind of falls apart. And let's put it this way. There are more civilians that would rather have a visitation by General John McCausland, who burnt the town, than have another visitation by the New Yorkers.
Really?
And what it is New Yorkers, when they came into Harrisburg, number one, a lot of the businesses closed or they inflated their prices. And there's a funny drawing that went into Harper's Weekly. It showed a New York State National Guardsman with a tin cup in his hand, scratching his head, and a store guy is pointing at a sign that says Susquehanna water, 6 cents per cup. So when they get into Chambersburg, they were treated very warmly. Well, something happens, and because of the fact that they're in Pennsylvania, they see all these able-bodied men walking around, but not necessarily answering Abraham Lincoln's call to join the militia. They start kind of getting a little cocky, and they assaulted one ex-officer of the 126 to the point where they start shouting, fist fighting. Some of the New Yorkers actually were noted to be, they were recorded in the newspaper, basically saying, look, we're going to go ahead and pull our bayonets out. We're going to fix bayonets. We're going to go ahead and kill everybody here.
Jesus.
So it's kind of quickly calmed the feelings down. That's when their officers finally got a hold of the situation, and they pushed them about 2 miles south of Chambersburg and kind of had them waiting there. And that's pretty much where more of the hatred for the New Yorkers come back in, because as Jenkins's cavalry starts making their advance on the 22nd of June, Knipe basically gives the order for them to fall back, and that gets translated into full-fledged retreat. About 3/4 of them, so we have all of the 8th and about half of the 71st New York, they make it to Scotland, board the trains to go back up to Carlisle. Half of the 71st got lost, and they march back up directly to Shippensburg, and they'll go ahead and encamp at the old campgrounds, and then they'll get the order to go ahead and march to Carlisle. Wait a minute, train's coming to get you guys. So they marched to Scotland, realizing that the train was picking them back up at Shippensburg, so they went ahead and about face came back up there. So there's a lot of really interesting stories with the New York State National Guard in that aspect. But on the 23rd of June, Jenkins is going to go ahead and push further into Pennsylvania. He's already recaptured Chambersburg. Shippensburg is going to be next. And you only have a small detachment of the 1st New York Lincoln Cavalry, basically, that's going to be between Jenkins's men and Shippensburg. So at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, skirmishing is going to erupt. And the civilians of Shippensburg were kind of excited to see this. And there's a couple of accounts where some of them were up on the rooftops of their houses, kind of watching the events take place below. But then the New York Lincoln Cavalry, under the command of Major Boyd, they fall back all the way to the toll house, which is on the other end of, or the northern end of Shippensburg, and they're going to go ahead and pretty much give up the field. They just don't have the numbers to stand up against an entire brigade, basically.
Yeah.
So the citizens expect occupation to happen immediately. It doesn't really happen immediately. They actually had time to start hiding some of their valuables. There was even one shopkeeper who actually whitewashed his sign to kind of hide the business name, for an example. One of the cool things we have in our collection, and the name of the family, it slips my mind right now, but they took an old log that's about maybe 16 inches long, hollowed it out. That way they can put some of the family valuables into it, and then they would put a lid over top of that, and they buried it on the bottom of a wood pile.
Uh-huh.
And to have an artifact like that to go with the story is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
So,
and they're lucky the Confederates didn't use the wood for fire.
Right.
You know?
So when Jenkins gets there, he sets up his headquarters at the square, and like we were talking earlier, Jenkins's brigade is not what you would call like fashionable cavalry like Jeb Stuart, but they are outstanding foragers. And they start pretty much going out to the Shippensburg community and outside of the area, collecting all kinds of supplies, medical supplies, food, things like that. One of the cool stories was that they walked into the Altic pharmacy, which was near the square, and they basically were trying to go ahead and gather all the medical supplies that they could possibly get a hold of. One of the artifacts that belonged to the family we actually have in our collection, and basically it's I don't want to say it's a cupboard, but it's kind of like a hutch.
Okay.
It's would sit in a corner. So to have that piece of history being associated with the Confederate invasion was pretty cool. And then you have Johnson's division that comes in. They pretty much encamp along where Dykeman Springs are. And then from there, they'll go ahead and start marching northward to Carlisle. And what's kind of funny is one of the officers in Johnson's division noted about the women of Shippensburg and basically stated how ugly they were.
Yeah. So. Yeah, they weren't too kind of towards the women of the whole area, really.
Right.
I think there's a quote from some Confederate officer or it just might have been a soldier in Rhodes's division when they were in Carlisle, I believe. And he refers to the waitress. He goes to have a breakfast, and the woman serving him is not happy to be serving him, but he refers to her as a rather Dutchy-looking woman. And yeah, they had some pretty harsh criticisms of the women here. But from what I remember, the women weren't particularly kind to them either, right? They would
no. It's not like you take Early's division when it occupied Waynesboro on June 23rd, and the first thing that he does is he shuts the whiskey stills down, and of course the famed Louisiana Tigers actually get a hold of some of it, and they're drinking and having fun. And one of the soldiers was walking around and happened to smell fresh bread being baked, and goes in there, and the woman is like, I don't want no trouble. I want no trouble. I'm not going to give you trouble. And he's like, I just want some of that lovely bread that I smell. So she serves him up, and as she's talking to him, she finds out that he's from Louisiana, and she started panicking because apparently they had a bad reputation from the rumors that she'd heard. Well, she fainted.
Yes.
And just before her head hit the floor, the soldier pretty much caught her head. Then the husband walks in.
Uh-oh.
And the soldier's like, I don't know what happened. I just told her I was from Louisiana, and he proceeded to tell him about the reputation. And the soldier's like, well, I don't want any trouble. I didn't do this, and starts kind of backing.
Yeah.
But I know like a lot of the communities, and there's not really much written with Shippensburg with this, but I know that all of the other communities, the women heckled a lot of the soldiers.
Right.
And then as the Confederate Army retreats from Gettysburg and they go back through some of these communities, the women that heckled these guys now actually felt sorry for them. And they were actually sorry that they heckled them.
Really?
So
strange.
Yeah, that come from a lady by the name of Rachel Welsh out of Waynesboro.
Are there any stories, because Jenkins Cavalry was the first unit to come through, but not the last, not the only. Right? So Johnson's division is next?
Johnson's division, he'll come in on June 24th, and he'll occupy it for a couple days before they continue moving on up to Carlisle.
And then they're called back. Right. And then so do they go through Shippensburg again as they come back?
Some of them will actually go through Mount Holly. Some of them actually do go back through Shippensburg.
Okay. So while the Confederates are there, regardless of which unit it is, are there any stories of, I guess they would call them today, atrocities, like any bad behavior by the soldiers towards the civilians?
Actually, with Shippensburg's case, it seemed like the Confederates.
Ooh! Oh! So hard to believe that's not real people. You know? The dynamics. Hey, listen, we kind of referred to this before, but did you know that there are almost 300 audio shows and almost 100 video shows on our Patreon page? Did you know that?
That's a lot.
Did you know that several respectable licensed battlefield guides are patrons but have asked to remain anonymous so as not to ruin their reputations?
That's not true.
Okay, the last part is not true, but they are. Several are. You know, Patreon allows us now to offer you a 7-day free trial if you're not sure that you want to join, and it allows you to purchase individual episodes. They're not all, I have to go through and individually make them for sale, so I'm doing a little bit at a time. Mm-hmm. But, you know, maybe you don't want to be a patron and pay something monthly, but you do want to hear a specific episode. So you just buy the episode.
Yeah.
It's cheaper to be a patron monthly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, cheaper. You know, if you're going to go individually, it's going to be a little more expensive, but it's a one-time deal. And then maybe you'll become a patron. But if you do the 7-day free trial, you do it at the second lieutenant level. Second lieutenants get all of the audio shows that we put out. So if you have the time in those 7 days, you can binge just about all 300 of our audio shows. And then you don't have to become a patron, right? You should, though, because otherwise you're just freeloading. And you know what people say about freeloaders. Freeloaders are... Whatever rhymes with freeloaders. What rhymes with loader?
Motor.
Freeloaders are bad boaters for things to come. They do not bode well. To freeload is to not bode well.
Yeah.
For if we ever meet in person. You become a member. It is cheaper, blah, blah, blah. There's also monthly and annual subscriptions available. You get a discount if you go annually. Okay, a lot of people say, hey, I don't want a monthly thing. Can I just pay you for the whole year? Mm-hmm. Used to be. The answer was no. They didn't have a way to do that.
Oh.
They've had it now for like 2 years or so.
Oh.
The new thing is that you can buy individual episodes, okay? There's also a store there for digital downloads, so if you want Alderson, Broadison, or other things, you can go in there. It comes free with certain memberships. You can go and purchase them for like $5. Unfortunately, there's a minimum that they make you charge, so you got to go and do that, but whatever.
So there's audio clips that people can buy?
No. Well, yeah, just Cam going, Alderson, Broadison, you could do that.
Ringtones.
Well, that's what you could use it for. You can use it as a ringtone.
Man.
Anyway, but my point about this
I want my voice to be somebody's ringtone.
Yes. Well, exactly. So we could put, and the mayor was there, and we could do all those things. But anyway, did you know that 908 out of 909 college sophomores agree that you can't say you're fully prepared for the guide exam without having consumed all of AG's Patreon content? Guys, they're college sophomores. Watch the news. They know everything. So trust the science of that poll and trust the college sophomores. You've only lived decades more than they have, so what the hell do you know anyway, right?
Was this Elizabeth? Elizabeth.
She couldn't care less about this stuff. Go to patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg and join today so you can ace the guide exam. We'll be right back after these quick notes from the Walk Dollars.